For 7 long years, the corridors of Ravenswood Manor echoed with a cold, piercing silence. Lady Seraphina, the Duchess, was the perfect wife in every way, beautiful, dutiful, and intelligent. And Alistair the Duke was a decorated war hero, powerful and respected by all. But to each other, they were strangers. For 2,555 nights, the Duke's bed remained empty. The staff whispered, and society speculated. He was a man of vigour, and she was a woman in her prime. Why, for 7 years, did he never touch his wife? The answer was a secret buried so deep it would take a villain to unearth it. And on one desperate night, it would finally bring the Duke to his knees. The morning of the annual harvest ball dawned crisp and cold, much like the marriage it was meant to celebrate. Seraphina, Duchess of Ravenswood, stood in the grand ballroom, her fingers tracing the chilled marble of a pillar. At 26, she was a woman moulded by duty. She had been married at 19, a hopeful bride given to a man she'd met only twice. That man was Alistair, the Duke, a returning hero from the Napoleonic Wars. Their wedding night had set the tone for 7 years. He had stood at the door of her bedchamber, his tall frame silhouetted by the hall light. He was devastatingly handsome, but his face was a mask of granite. A faint, silver scar cut from his left temple to his jaw, a permanent reminder of Waterloo. "Madam," he had said, his voice void of all emotion, "I must apologize. I cannot be the husband you deserve. This arrangement, it was not of my choosing. You shall have your freedom, your own wing, and any allowance you desire. In return, I ask only that you maintain the public appearance of this union. I will not trouble you." And he hadn't. For 7 years he had been perfectly, excruciatingly polite. He was Your Grace, she was Madam. They dined together thrice a week, discussing the weather, crop rotations, and the dull politics of the London season. But he never looked at her. Not really. His eyes, a startling grey, seemed to look through her, fixed on a point in the past she could not access. Now she directed the servants with quiet authority. "No, Mr. Hobbs," she said gently to the butler. "The blue silks must be used for the main table. The gold clashes with the late-season roses." Hobbs bowed. "At once, Your Grace. You have an eye for it, as always." She did. In 7 years of isolation, Seraphina had poured her energy into the estate. While Alistair locked himself in his study, poring over maps of battles long since fought, she had learned to run Ravenswood. She balanced the ledgers, negotiated with tenants, and had even turned a profit from the wool trade, a fact the estate steward, Mr. Henderson, kept strictly between themselves. She was a duchess in title, but a steward in practice. A sharp, metallic thud echoed from the hall. Alistair! He was walking with his cane this morning. The shrapnel in his leg always pained him when the weather turned. He entered the ballroom, his black frock coat tailored to perfection by his preferred London tailor, Henry Poole. He looked, as always, like a man carved from ice. "Madam, the preparations seem adequate." "Your Grace," she inclined her head, "I trust the ball will meet your expectations." "It is a distraction," he said curtly, his gaze sweeping the room, but never landing on her. "But a necessary one." He was about to turn when a footman rushed in. "Alistair, my dear man." Alistair visibly tensed. Seraphina turned to see a newcomer, a man she didn't recognize. He was handsome in a way Alistair was not. All bright smiles, fashionable attire, and an easy, practiced charm. "Lord Harrington," Alistair said, his voice dropping a further degree. "I was not aware you were returning from the continent so soon." "Piers, please." The man, Lord Piers Harrington, beamed. He turned his full attention to Seraphina, taking her hand and bowing low to kiss her knuckles. His eyes, unlike Alistair's, were direct and appraising. "And you must be the Duchess, the jewel of Ravenswood. My dear, Alistair has been keeping you a secret. I am Piers Harrington. Our estates border to the north. I have been in Vienna for an age." "Lord Harrington," Seraphina said, withdrawing her hand politely. "Welcome." "She is a vision, Alistair." "A vision," Piers said, ignoring the Duke's thunderous expression. "I simply cannot wait for tonight. I fear I shall have to monopolize your wife's dance card." Alistair's hand tightened on the silver head of his cane. "My wife has duties, Harrington." "Nonsense," Piers laughed. "What duty is more important than delighting your guests? I shall see you both tonight." He bowed again to Seraphina, his smile lingering, before sauntering out. The silence he left behind was heavier than before. For the first time in 7 years, Alistair was looking directly at Seraphina. But it was not with warmth. It was with a cold, unfamiliar suspicion. The first stone had been thrown into their frozen lake. The ballroom at Ravenswood was ablaze with light. Hundreds of candles reflected in the polished floors, and the scent of beeswax and late-season roses filled the air. Seraphina stood at Alistair's side in the receiving line, a perfect statue in a gown of deep emerald silk. She smiled, she curtsied. She was the consummate Duchess. Alistair beside her was a dark, brooding presence, his scar stark white under the candlelight. Lord Piers Harrington arrived late, making a calculated entrance. He immediately sought out Seraphina. "Your Grace," he murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "You are magnificent. That colour, it does things to a man's composure." Seraphina gave him a tight-lipped smile. "You flatter me, Lord Harrington." "I merely speak the truth," he said. He glanced at Alistair, who was trapped in a conversation with a portly baron. "Your husband, he is a great man. A hero. But a hero's shadow is a cold place to live, is it not?" Before she could respond, the orchestra struck up the first waltz. It was a ritual. For 7 years, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood would open the harvest ball with a single, obligatory dance. Alistair turned to her, his gloved hand extended. "Madam." She placed her fingers in his. His hand was warm, strong, and utterly impersonal. He led her to the floor. As he put his hand on her waist, she resisted the urge to flinch. It was the only time all year he touched her. They moved with practiced, empty perfection. They were the most beautiful couple in the room, and the most broken. "Harrington seems familiar with you," Alistair said, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "I had not met him before this morning, Your Grace," Seraphina replied, keeping her gaze fixed on his cravat. "He has a reputation, with women, and with cards." "I shall be sure to keep my distance, then. See that you do," he said. The words were a command, not a request. A flicker of anger, hot and rare, sparked in Seraphina's chest. He had no right to dictate her company. He had abdicated that right 2,555 nights ago. The waltz ended. He bowed stiffly, released her, and retreated to the shadows by the hearth, accepting a glass of brandy. He would stand there for the rest of the night, watching. Piers Harrington was at her side instantly. "My dance, I believe, Duchess?" She was annoyed with Alistair, and Harrington was, if nothing else, a pleasant diversion. "Of course, my lord." He swept her onto the floor, and the contrast was immediate. Where Alistair was rigid and cold, Piers was fluid and warm. He held her a fraction closer than was proper. He smiled. He talked. "You manage this all yourself, don't you?" he murmured, steering her expertly through the crowd. "I have a capable staff, my lord." "Oh, I'm sure. But I heard in the village, the new wool contract with the merchants in Leeds. That was you, the new crop rotation? You again. You saved the tenant farms from blight last spring. Alistair is a fool. Seraphina's blood ran cold. My lord, you are improper. Am I? Or am I the only one willing to say what everyone knows? His eyes scanned her face. He leaves a mind like yours to languish. He leaves a woman like you, unattended. It is a sin, Duchess, a mortal sin. He spun her, and for a moment her eyes met Alistair's across the room. The Duke's face was unreadable, but the glass in his hand was clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Piers danced her out onto the terrace, claiming the need for air. The cool night was a relief. He does not deserve you, Seraphina, Piers said, using her name for the first time. It felt like a violation. You overstep, Lord Harrington. Do I? He stepped closer. 7 years. The whole county knows. They call him the Iron Duke, and not for his battlefield prowess. They called you the Virgin Duchess. What a waste, Seraphina. What a god-forsaken waste. Good night, my lord. She turned to go, but he caught her arm. I could give you what he won't, he whispered, his charm vanishing, replaced by a raw, predatory hunger. A child? A life? Passion? Let go of me. Her voice was ice. Or what? You'll tell your husband? He laughed, a short, ugly sound. What will he do? He won't fight for you. He won't even touch you. I said, let go. She said to let her go. Alistair's voice cut through the night. He stood in the doorway, his cane gone. He didn't limp. He moved with a sudden, lethal grace. Piers released her, a mocking smile on his face. Ah, the Duke. Come to protect your property. A bit late for that, isn't it? Alistair didn't spare him a glance. His grey eyes were locked on Seraphina, searching her face. Are you unharmed? I am fine, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Go inside, madam. Alistair. Go. She hesitated, then swept past him into the ballroom, her heart hammering. She did not look back as Alistair took a slow, deliberate step toward Lord Harrington on the dark terrace. Seraphina did not know what was said on the terrace, only that Lord Harrington left the ball 20 minutes later, his charming smile entirely absent. Alistair returned to his spot by the hearth, but he was no longer watching the room. He was watching her. It was unsettling. For 7 years she had been invisible. Now she was the sole focus of his intense, stormy gaze. She felt pinned, a butterfly under glass. She made her excuses as soon as was proper and fled to the sanctuary of her wing. Sleep, however, would not come. She lay awake, her mind replaying the feel of Piers's hand on her arm, the shocking possessiveness in Alistair's voice. Around 3 a.m., a sound jolted her from her restless state, a crash, then a shout, thick and guttural that was barely human. Fire! Fire on the left flank! Reloading! Where is Sergeant Matthews? God, Matthews! It was Alistair. Her heart leaped into her throat. She'd heard muted sounds before, through the thick stone walls that separated their wings. Muffled cries, thuds. But never this. This was raw, untamed terror. She grabbed her dressing gown and ran. She ignored the protocol of 7 years, flying down the corridor to his wing, a place she had never set foot in since her wedding. His valet, an older man named Peters, was standing uselessly outside the Duke's door, wringing his hands. "Your Grace, you shouldn't—" She pushed past him. The room was a wreck. A heavy armchair was overturned. A pitcher was shattered on the floor. Alistair was in the center of the room, clad only in his nightshirt, his eyes wide and unseeing. He was not in Ravenswood. He was back in Belgium, at Waterloo. "They're breaking through," he yelled, raising an arm to ward off an invisible blow. "Get the cannon! Alistair!" she cried. But he didn't hear her. Peters rushed forward. "Your Grace, it's just a dream. Wake up!" Alistair, in his terror, swung. He didn't mean to, but his fist connected with the valet's jaw, sending the man sprawling. "No!" Serafina shouted, not in fear, but in command. She grabbed a heavy wool blanket from the foot of his bed. He turned on her, his eyes wild. He saw an enemy, a French cuirassier. "Alistair!" she said again, her voice sharp. He lunged. Instead of retreating, she stepped into his lunge, wrapping the heavy blanket around him, pulling it tight over his arms. He fought her, his strength immense, but she held on, pressing her face close to his chest, her arms wrapped around him from behind, pinning his. "You are not there," she whispered, her voice fierce, right against his ear. "You are not in Belgium. You are at Ravenswood. You are home. You are safe." He thrashed, shouting, but she held on, a dead weight of love and desperation. "You are Alistair, Duke of Ravenswood," she repeated, her own tears blurring her vision. "The battle is over. You are home. You are safe. I am here. You are safe." He stilled. A great, shuddering breath tore through his body, then another. The tension left his muscles, and he went limp in her arms. "Serafina," he whispered. His voice was cracked, small and utterly lost. She was so stunned he'd used her name, she almost let go. She loosened her grip, stepping back as he stumbled to the bed, sinking onto its edge. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking. She looked at the terrified valet. "Mr. Peters, please fetch the laudanum. And warm milk." "Yes, Your Grace." He scrambled out. She stood for a long moment, watching this broken man who was her husband. The Iron Duke was weeping. He didn't look up, just sat there, shaking, consumed by a shame that was almost as terrifying as the nightmare itself. Quietly, she righted the overturned chair. She picked up the larger pieces of the broken pitcher. She did not speak, simply moved through the room, restoring order. When Peters returned, Alistair was still in the same position. Serafina took the laudanum and a glass of water from the tray. She knelt before him. He flinched, as if expecting a blow. "Your Grace," she said softly. He slowly, agonizingly, raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale. The scar looked raw. He was no longer the Duke. He was just a man. "Drink this," she said, holding out the glass. He looked at the laudanum, then at her. His hand was shaking so badly he couldn't take it. With a steady hand, she raised the glass to his lips. He drank, his eyes never leaving hers. There was a universe of questions in that look. Terror, confusion, and a new, agonizing vulnerability. He finished, and she set the glass down. She was still kneeling at his feet. She should go. She should leave and pretend this never happened. Instead, she took his trembling hand, the one that had struck his valet, and held it between her own. It was a simple, profound gesture, a bridge across 7 years of ice. "The battle is over, Alistair," she said softly. "It has been over for a very long time." He stared at their joined hands as if he'd never seen them before. He didn't speak. He just held on, his grip tightening, as if she were the only thing keeping him from falling into the dark. The morning after the nightmare was thick with unspoken words. Serafina sent a pot of strong coffee to the Duke's wing, along with a note for Mr. Peters, instructing him to take the day to recover. She received no reply from Alistair. He did not appear for breakfast. He did not appear for luncheon. Serafina found herself distracted, her normal routines failing to hold her attention. She was correcting the menus when Mr. Henderson, the estate steward, found her. "Your Grace," he said, bowing. He looked agitated. "A small matter. A very small matter. What is it, Mr. Henderson? The Duke. His Grace has requested the ledgers, all of them. Seraphina froze. All of them? Aye. He's in his study. He's been in there since dawn, they say. He wants the household books, the tenant books, and the master ledgers. This was the danger. The master ledgers were a fiction. They were the clean, simplified books she'd had Henderson prepare for Alistair's cursory glances, books that showed a stable, if unremarkable, profit. The real ledgers were locked in her own desk, the ones that showed the truth. He seemed angry, Henderson whispered. He mentioned Lord Harrington. He said he wanted to know the true state of his affairs. Seraphina understood. Alistair, spurred by Harrington's insults and the shock of the previous night, was finally looking. Very well, Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice calm. Give him the master ledgers, but bring the private accounts to me. It is time he saw them. Your Grace, are you certain? I am. An hour later, Seraphina stood outside Alistair's study. She knocked. Go away, he barked. She opened the door and walked in. The room was a disaster, nearly as bad as his bedroom had been. Books were pulled from shelves. Papers were strewn everywhere. Alistair stood by the window, his back to her. He hadn't slept, and he had been drinking. I said, go away, Peters. I don't need your damned coddling. It is not Peters, Seraphina said. He spun around. His face was haggard. He looked at the heavy, leather-bound book in her hands. What is that? You asked Mr. Henderson for the accounts, she said, walking forward and placing the book on his desk. He gave you the ones I prepared for you. This is the truth. He stared at the book, then at her. What game is this, madam? It is no game. She opened the ledger. You were right to be concerned about Harrington. He is a predator, and he circles estates he believes are weak. Ravenswood is not weak, Alistair growled. No, Seraphina agreed softly. It is not. Not anymore. He looked at her, confused. She turned the page. This is the debt ledger from 8 years ago, just before your father passed. You were still in Spain. Alistair looked. His face paled. The numbers were staggering. This is impossible. Your father was a gambler, Alistair. He wagered and lost almost everything. When you came home a hero, you came home to a bankrupt estate. You were land-rich and cash-poor to the point of insolvency. He sank into his chair, staring at the page. He forced this marriage on me. He said it was an alliance, to secure the family line. He forced the marriage, Seraphina said, her voice devoid of pity. Because he needed my dowry. My dowry, which I inherited from my mother's shipping business, was the only thing that kept the banks from seizing Ravenswood. Alistair looked up, his grey eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. You knew this? I knew it the day I married you. And you said nothing. What was I to say? You had just returned from war. You were a hero, but you were also a stranger who looked at me as if I were a piece of furniture. You retreated to your wing, and I got to work. She turned the page. This is 1818. The wool contracts I negotiated with the mills in Leeds. This is 1819. The investment I made using my own inheritance in the East India Company. I used my family's contacts at Coutts Bank. This, she pointed to another column, is where I paid off the last of your father's gambling debts, just last spring. She closed the book. The silence in the room was absolute. You saved this house, he whispered. He wasn't speaking to her, but to himself. All this time, I thought I was protecting you. From me. I thought I was sparing you. You were not sparing me, she said, the ice of 7 years finally breaking in her own voice. You were ignoring me. You were so lost in your own battle, Alistair, that you never once thought to look at mine. Seraphina! He stood, reaching a hand out, but she flinched back. The movement, small as it was, stopped him cold. I did not do this for gratitude, she said, her voice shaking with a sudden, violent surge of emotion. I did this for the tenants, for the staff, for the name that I bear. I did this because it was my duty. Just as it was my duty to come to you last night when you were screaming. Just as it has been my duty to listen to your nightmares through the wall for 7 years. His face crumpled. You knew. I knew you were in pain. I did not know why. I only knew that the man I married was trapped in a prison, and he had locked me out of it. Before he could process this, the door burst open. It was Peters, his face white with panic. Your Grace, it's Lord Harrington. He's here. He's not in the parlour. He's in the main gallery, and he has men with him. Your Grace, I think he's taking the Rembrandt. Alistair and Seraphina raced to the Grand Gallery. What they found was a scene of methodical theft. Lord Piers Harrington was standing in the centre of the room, calmly directing 2 burly men who were in the process of cutting Alistair's grandfather's portrait, a genuine Rembrandt, from its frame. Harrington! Alistair roared. The sound was pure command, the voice of a duke and a colonel. Piers turned, a look of mock surprise on his face. Ah, Ravenswood, and the lovely Duchess. I'm afraid I've come to collect on a debt. You will unhand my property, or I will have you shot. Oh, I wouldn't, Piers said, tapping a document against his palm. You see, I did some digging after you. Ejected me from your ball. I paid a visit to an old associate of your father's, a moneylender by the name of Silas Croft. Seraphina's stomach tightened. She knew that name. Croft was the one she hadn't been able to pay off. His interest rates were criminal, and the debt was legally questionable. It seems, Piers continued, that your father, in his desperation, put up the contents of this house as collateral. Not the house itself, that was entailed, but everything in it. And I, being a man of opportunity, bought that debt this morning. For pennies on the pound. You're a thief, Alistair said, his voice dangerously low. I'm a businessman, Piers corrected. This Rembrandt alone will cover the principal. The rest of this is just interest. He waved a hand at the room. I'll be taking the tapestries as well. And the silver. Alistair took a step forward, and Piers's men tensed. I wouldn't, Piers warned again. It's all perfectly legal. I have the writ, unless of course you'd care to pay the debt. It's... £50,000, plus my fee, of course. £50,000. It was an astronomical sum, even for them. Seraphina had liquidity, but not that much, not without selling land. You know we cannot produce that sum on a moment's notice, Seraphina said, her mind racing. I know, Piers smiled. But I am a reasonable man. I might be persuaded to be patient. His eyes slid to Seraphina, his meaning sickeningly clear. Perhaps a different sort of payment could be arranged. Companionship. The Duchess is a fine negotiator. I'm sure we could come to an arrangement that satisfies us all. It was the threat from the terrace, made public. He was trying to buy her. Alistair went utterly still. The air around him seemed to drop in temperature. Get out, he said. I'm afraid I can't. Not until I have my property. Piers nodded to his men. Continue. No, Seraphina said. Piers laughed. My dear Duchess, you have no say here. This is a matter of law. You are correct, Seraphina said, stepping forward. This is a matter of law. and as the person who has managed this estate's finances for 7 years, I can tell you that the debt you hold is void." Piers's smile faltered. "What? Don't be ridiculous. It's signed by the late Duke." "It is," Serafina agreed. "But what you clearly failed to discover in your thorough research, Lord Harrington, is that the late Duke, 5 years before his death, signed over the entire contents of this house and all its holdings to me, personally, as part of my marriage settlement." Alistair's head snapped toward her. He had no idea. Serafina continued, her voice ringing with authority. It was a measure to protect the estate from exactly this kind of situation, to protect it from his own creditors. He may have signed your note, but he signed it against collateral he did not own. It belongs, and has always belonged, to me. Piers's face turned a mottled red. "You're lying." "Am I?" Serafina smiled coldly. "Mr. Hobbs," she called to the butler, who was hovering by the door, "please send word to the magistrate. Inform him that Lord Harrington is here, attempting to steal my property. And while you're at it, fetch my solicitor. He keeps a copy of the settlement at his office in the village." Piers looked from Serafina's unblinking, confident face to Alistair, who was now smiling, a slow, dangerous smile. "She's not lying, Piers," Alistair said, his voice almost conversational. "I've just spent my morning learning exactly how meticulous my wife is. You, on the other hand, have been played for a fool." The two hired men looked at each other, then at the Duke, and dropped the edge of the painting. They wanted no part of this. "This isn't over," Piers snarled at Serafina. "Oh, I think it is," she replied, "unless you'd like to wait for the magistrate. I hear he has a particular dislike for men who prey on war heroes." Piers looked at Alistair's face, at the cold fury simmering there, and made his decision. You will regret this," he spat, and stormed out of the gallery, his men scrambling after him. The silence that descended was profound. Alistair and Serafina were left standing in the gallery, the half-cut Rembrandt hanging limply in its frame. Alistair turned to her. He was no longer looking at a stranger. He was looking at a woman he didn't know at all, a woman of iron and fire, a woman who had just saved him. Again. "My marriage settlement?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Your father was a desperate man," Serafina said, suddenly exhausted. "But he was not a complete fool. He wanted to protect his legacy. He just didn't trust himself to do it. So, he trusted me." "He trusted you," Alistair repeated. "But I never—" He took a step toward her. She didn't flinch this time. "Serafina," he said, and the name was a plea. "Last night, you knew about the nightmares." "I told you," she said softly. "I've known for years. But you did more than know." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "I found this in my desk this morning. I didn't understand it. Until now." He unfolded it. It was a letter. She recognized her own handwriting. It was a discreet inquiry addressed to the esteemed royal physician, Sir Henry Halford, whom she had met once in London. It detailed Alistair's symptoms, the nightmares, the agitation, the battle fatigue, and asked, hypothetically, for a colleague what his recommended course of treatment might be. Sir Henry's reply was penned at the bottom: a reduction in laudanum, an increase in physical exercise, and a tincture of valerian root. You've been treating me," Alistair whispered, his eyes scanning the letter. This is why Peters started arguing with me about the laudanum. This is why he's been dragging me on those god-awful 5-mile walks." "He was concerned," Serafina said. "He was following your orders," Alistair stated, his voice thick. He looked up from the letter, and the last wall of his defense crumbled. The shame, the gratitude, the waste, it was all there in his eyes. "You have been my wife," he said, his voice breaking, "in every way that matters. You have run my home. You have saved my legacy. You have cared for my mind. And I left you alone. I left you to face Harrington. I left you to sleep in a cold bed for 7 years. God, Serafina. Why? Why what?" she whispered, tears finally tracing paths down her own cheeks. "Why did you stay?" The question hung between them, more fragile and more powerful than anything that had been said in 7 years. "Why did I stay?" Serafina repeated, a small, sad laugh escaping her. "Where was I to go, Alistair? I am your wife. This is my home. You were my husband. A husband in name," he bit out, his self-loathing a tangible thing. "A cold, silent coward." "No," she said, her voice firm. "Not a coward, a soldier, a man in pain." "Pain?" He let out a harsh laugh. "You think this," he pointed to his leg, "is what kept me from you? This limp? Or this?" He traced the scar on his face. These are trinkets, Serafina. Souvenirs." He turned away from her, walking to the window, his shoulders bowed. "You want to know why I never came to your bed? You, who deserved a husband, children, a life. You want to know the truth I've hidden from everyone? Even Peters?" He paused, and she could see the tremors in his hands. It wasn't just the nightmares. It was the wound, the one that no one sees. He took a sharp, ragged breath. "Waterloo. It wasn't a clean fight. We were at Quatre Bras, holding the crossroads. A shell. It exploded right next to me. It killed my sergeant, Matthews, the man I was screaming for last night. It tore him apart." Serafina brought a hand to her mouth. "It threw me 20 feet. The shrapnel. It hit my face, my leg, and elsewhere." His voice dropped to a choked whisper. "The surgeon, he said I was lucky. He said the wound was delicate. He said I might never be able to father a child, to be a husband." The confession fell into the room, brutal and sharp. "I came home a hero," he spat, "and my father threw a wife at me, a young, beautiful wife, and all I could think was, what if I failed her? What if I was broken? What if I could not perform the one duty a husband owes his wife? The shame of it, Serafina. It was worse than the shell. It was worse than the fear." He finally turned to look at her, his eyes hollowed out by the admission. "So I stayed away. I thought my coldness was a kindness. I thought it was better to be a cruel, distant husband than a failure, a eunuch. I thought I was sparing you." Serafina stared at him, the full, devastating weight of his 7-year sacrifice settling on her. He had not rejected her. He had rejected himself. He had walled himself in with his shame, believing he was protecting her from his own perceived inadequacy. She walked toward him, her steps measured and sure. He flinched, as if expecting her disgust. She stopped directly in front of him. She looked at his face, at the scar, at the pain in his eyes. And then, for the first time, she acted not as a duchess, but as a wife. She raised her hands and cupped his face, her thumbs tracing the tense line of his jaw. "You utter fool," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. His breath hitched. "Serafina, you don't... Do I look like a woman who cares only for heirs?" she demanded, her eyes flashing. "Do you think, after 7 years of living beside you, of watching you, of running your life, that the only thing I have found missing is a child? But a man, his duty, your duty, she said, her voice dropping, becoming intimate, was to talk to me. Your duty was to be my partner, not my guardian. Your duty was to let me in. You didn't spare me, Alistair. You condemned us both. You to your prison of shame, and me to a prison of loneliness. He squeezed his eyes shut. I didn't know how. I came back from that hell, and I was a different man. I was a monster. I struck Peters last night. You were in a nightmare, she corrected gently, and you have been in one for 7 years, but you are awake now. What if the surgeon was right, he whispered, the question tearing him apart. What if I cannot, and what if you cannot, she replied, her voice soft but unbreakable. What if we are never able to have children? Is that all a marriage is? We will fill this house with life, with music, with dogs, with us. Is that not enough? He opened his eyes. He was truly seeing her for the first time, not as a political match, not as a woman he was failing, but as his partner, his equal, his savior. It is more than I deserve, he choked out. It is no more than we both deserve, she said. She leaned in, her body close to his for the first time. I have known you in shadow, Alistair. I have known your pain, your ledgers, and your history. Do not, for one more second, hide your scars from me. Not these, she lightly touched the one on his face, and not the ones no one else can see. He looked at her, at this woman of impossible strength and compassion, this woman who had saved his home, defended his honor, and ministered to his broken mind, all while he treated her like a ghost. The 7 years of distance, of coldness, of fear, all collapsed in on him, and the only thing that remained was a desperate, agonizing need. The question hung in the vast, picture-lined gallery, heavier and more fragile than the half-cut masterpiece hanging limply from its frame. Why did you stay? Why did I stay? Serafina repeated, the words tasting foreign. A small, humorless laugh, dry as parchment, escaped her lips. Where was I to go, Alistair? I am the Duchess of Ravenswood. This is my home. You were my husband. A husband in name, he bit out, the words a fresh wave of self-loathing. A cold, silent coward, a fraud who let you stand between him and the world. No, she said, and her voice was not soft. It was sharp, a surgeon's blade cutting to the truth. Not a coward, a soldier, a man in profound, suffocating pain, a man who built a fortress and forgot to build a door. Pain? He let out that same terrible, barking laugh. You think this, he pointed a rigid finger at his leg, is what kept me from you? This limp? Or this? He traced the silver scar that bisected his brow and cheek, a permanent mark of his past. These are trinkets, Serafina. Souvenirs. They are nothing but a convenient excuse. He turned away from her, a violent, jerky motion, and strode to the tall window. He gripped the heavy velvet drapes, his knuckles white, his back a wall of tailored black wool. You want to know why I never came to your bed? You, who deserved a husband, children, a life. You want to know the truth I've hidden from everyone? Even Peters? The truth that rotted me from the inside out for 7 years? He paused, and she could see the tremors that racked his entire frame. He was not the Iron Duke. He was a man being torn apart by his own secrets. It wasn't just the nightmares. It was the wound, the one no one sees. He took a sharp, ragged breath, and the story poured out of him, a torrent of confession held back for 2,155 nights. Waterloo. It wasn't a clean fight. We were at Quatre Bras, holding the crossroads. A shell. It exploded right next to me. It killed my sergeant. Matthews. The man I was screaming for last night." He choked on the name. It tore him apart. I can still smell the—" Serafina brought a hand to her mouth, her own stomach clenching. "It threw me 20 feet. The shrapnel. It hit my face, my leg, and elsewhere." His voice dropped, became a strangled, humiliated whisper. "The surgeon at the field hospital, he was a butcher, but he was fast. He saved my leg. But the other wound, he said I was lucky. He said the wound was delicate. He used that word. Delicate. He said I might never be able to father a child, to be a husband." The confession fell into the room, brutal and sharp, echoing in the sudden, awful silence. "I came home a hero," he spat, still facing the window, "and my father, with his debts and his false pride, threw a wife at me, a young, beautiful, whole wife. And all I could think was, what if I failed her? What if I brought her to our bed, and I was broken? What if I was nothing? A worthless, empty shell? The shame of it, Serafina. It was worse than the shell. It was worse than the fear. It was worse than dying." He finally, agonizingly, turned to look at her. His eyes were hollowed out by the admission, raw with a pain that made his physical scars look like mere scratches. So I stayed away. I locked my door. I thought my coldness was a kindness. I thought it was better to be a cruel, distant husband than a failure, a eunuch. The word was torn from him. I thought I was sparing you. Serafina stared at him, the full, devastating, idiotic weight of his 7-year sacrifice settling on her. He had not rejected her. He had rejected himself. He had walled himself in with his shame, believing he was protecting her from his own perceived inadequacy. All this time she had thought him cold, arrogant, indifferent, and he had been simply terrified. She walked toward him, her steps measured and sure on the marble floor. He flinched, a visible recoil as if expecting her disgust, her pity, or her rage. She stopped directly in front of him. She looked at his face, at the scar, at the torment in his eyes. And then, for the first time, she acted not as a duchess, not as an estate manager, but as a wife, as his partner. She raised her hands and cupped his face, her touch firm, her thumbs tracing the tense line of his jaw. "You magnificent, stubborn, utter fool," she whispered, her voice thick with a storm of emotions, anger, relief, and a sudden overwhelming wave of love. His breath hitched, a strangled sound. "Serafina, you don't understand. Do I not?" she demanded, her eyes flashing, her own tears beginning to well. "Do I look like a woman who cares only for heirs? Do you think, after 7 years of living beside you, of watching you, of running your life, that the only thing I have found missing is a child? But a man, his duty, his worth." "His worth," she repeated, her grip tightening. "Your duty," she said, her voice dropping, becoming intimate, fierce, "was to talk to me. Your duty was to be my partner, not my jailer. Your duty was to let me in. You didn't spare me, Alistair. You condemned us both. You to your prison of shame, and me to a prison of loneliness, wondering what crime I had committed to deserve such coldness." He squeezed his eyes shut, a tear breaking free and tracing a path down his scarred cheek. "I didn't know how. I came back from that hell, and I was a different man. I was a monster. I struck Peters last night. I am not whole." "You were in a nightmare," she corrected gently, her thumbs wiping his tears. "And you have been in one for 7 years. But you are awake now, We are awake." He opened his eyes, the grey depths swimming with a vulnerability that undid her. What if the surgeon was right?" he whispered, the question tearing him apart. What if I cannot? What if I am empty? What if I bring you nothing but this broken thing?" "Then you bring me this," she said, and she took his hand from his side, placing it flat against her own chest, over the frantic beating of her heart. "You bring me your truth. You bring me your hand to hold in the night. You bring me your voice in the library. You bring me you." Her voice grew stronger. "Do you think a child is the only thing that makes a family? Look at this house. It is empty because we have been empty. We can fill it. We will fill it with laughter and bad art and books read aloud. We will fill it with dogs and music and friends. We will fill it with life, Alistair. Our life." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "And if the surgeon was right, then he was right. And if he was wrong, then we will face that too, together. But he doesn't get to decide our future. That field surgeon in Belgium doesn't own us. We do. Alistair's control, the iron discipline that had seen him through war and 7 years of self-imposed exile, finally, completely shattered. He sank to his knees. It was not a courtly bow. It was a surrender, a complete and total collapse. He buried his face in her abdomen, his arms wrapping around her waist like vices, holding on to her as a drowning man holds the last piece of driftwood in a raging sea. Sobs tore through his body, harsh, ragged, animal sounds of a grief 7 years repressed. "Serafina, forgive me," he wept into the silk of her dress. "Forgive me. I have wasted us. I have wasted you. I watched you. I watched you in the garden. I watched you with Henderson, so strong, so capable, and I did nothing. I am nothing." She threaded her fingers into his hair, holding his head, anchoring him as the storm broke. "You are not nothing," she whispered, her own tears falling freely into his dark hair. "You are my husband." "I am not," he cried, his voice muffled. "I am a fraud. I have given you nothing. I don't even know how to be what you need." He pulled back, his face wrecked with tears and shame. He was still on his knees, a broken duke at her feet, looking up at her with the eyes of a lost boy. "I don't deserve you," he whispered, his voice raw. "I know that. I see that now. You are everything. But, Serafina." He took her hands in his, pressing them to his wet cheeks. This was it. The Iron Duke, begging, If you could find it in your heart, after all this, let me be your husband, in truth. Not as a title, but as a man. Let me try. I don't know if I am whole. I don't know if I am broken. But I cannot live another day in the shadows. Please, let me love you. Let me try. Please, Serafina, claim me. Not as property, but as yours. Choose me. Because I am so lost, and you are the only home I have ever had. Her heart ached. This man, this proud, tormented man, asking her to choose him after he had spent 7 years denying her any choice at all. She did not answer. Instead, she knelt, sinking to the marble floor in her emerald silk, the sound a soft shush in the quiet gallery. She knelt to meet him, so they were eye to eye. "Alistair," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "there is nothing to beg for, and there is nothing to claim. I have been your wife all along. You are the one who has been absent." She leaned in, and before he could speak, before he could apologize again, before he could retreat, She pressed her lips to his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a kiss of passion. It was 7 years of frustration, of loneliness, of anger, of unspoken words, and of a deep, abiding loyalty. It was the crack of ice, the roar of a cannon, and the desperate relief of a battle's end. It was the taste of salt from both their tears. He was still for a beat, frozen in shock. Then, with a sound that was half sob, half groan, he kissed her back. His hands, no longer trembling, came up to cradle her face, his touch desperate, clumsy, and utterly reverent. It was a kiss that sealed a new vow, one made not of duty or dowries, but of raw, painful, beautiful truth. When she finally pulled back, they were both breathless, foreheads resting together. "The surgeon," she murmured against his lips. He might have been wrong. He opened his eyes. The hollowness was gone, replaced by a new, terrifying, and brilliant light. "I don't care," Alistair breathed, his voice thick. "He can be right. He can be wrong. I don't care. I have you. You. That is all." "Then stand up, Alistair," she whispered. "Stand up and come home." She didn't pull him. She held out her hand. He looked at it for a long second, then laced his fingers through hers. He rose to his feet, pulling her up with him. So they stood together, equals for the first time. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and a new emotion dawned. Desire. Not the desperate hunger of Lord Harrington, but a deep, profound, aching need to be close to her, to honor her, to know her. I want to carry you," he said, his voice rough, as if the words were new to him. "Is that... may I?" She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Yes." He scooped her into his arms. He was strong, far stronger than she'd imagined, and he held her securely against his chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him. Brandy, old books, and a faint, clean scent of soap. She felt the solid, steady beat of his heart against her own. He carried her out of the gallery. He did not limp. Mr. Hobbs was in the main hall, and he froze, his eyes widening as the Duke carried the Duchess down the corridor. Alistair didn't pause, but his gaze met his butler's. Hobbs's expression of shock melted into one of slow, profound understanding. He had served this family his entire life, and he was finally seeing his master whole. He bowed deeply, not to the Duke, but to the couple. Alistair carried her up the main staircase, ignoring the wing that led to his own cold, dark rooms. He walked down the corridor to her wing, a place he had never set foot in since their wedding day. He nudged her door open with his foot, his eyes never leaving hers. He was still afraid. She could see it, but he was moving forward. He didn't throw her onto the bed. He set her gently on her feet. They stood together in her lavender-scented room, surrounded by books, embroidery, and traces of the life she had built without him. "Seraphina," he said. One word that carried question, confession, and prayer. She took his hand, not to lead him to the bed, but to the 2 chairs by the fire. "Tell me about Sergeant Matthews," she whispered. So he did. As the sun sank and the fire dimmed, Alistair spoke of mud, fear, and friendship, of everything he had buried. When silence finally returned, it was heavy but peaceful. He stood, locked the door, not to trap her, but to keep the world out. Then he turned, hand extended, no longer desperate but open. Seraphina rose, placed her hand in his, and for the first time in 7 years, the silence between them was not empty, but the beginning of something new. They say that love can thaw the coldest of winters, but for Seraphina and Alistair, it was the truth that finally set them free. For 7 years they lived as strangers under one roof, trapped by secrets and scars, his from a war that wouldn't end, and hers from a loneliness she bore with silent strength. It wasn't a rival or a ball that changed them. It was the brave, terrifying act of confession. Alistair's greatest wound wasn't the shrapnel he carried, but the shame. And Seraphina's greatest power wasn't her dowry, but her unwavering, quiet loyalty. Their story teaches us that sometimes the people who seem the most cold and distant are just the ones fighting the hardest battles in silence. True love isn't just passion. It's seeing the other person's scars and loving them because of them, not in spite of them. If you were touched by the story of the Duke and his Duchess, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a story of real, hard-won love, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of drama, twists, and the power of truth. We love reading your thoughts, so tell us in the comments, what was the moment that finally broke the ice for you?